Hello, Waswere here and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be going over the basics of ranged DPS and how to build a ranged rotation for yourself. First of all, before we get into the video, I need to give a large shout out to the PVM Encyclopedia Discord. While I knew a lot of this information myself, it gave me a great place to double check my work and make sure I wasn't missing anything. I'm going to leave a link in the description of the video, and if you want to learn more or read more about what I say in this video, I strongly suggest you join that Discord. It is the single best place to get PVM-based information. One more preamble, we're going to be focusing on the basics for this video, so we aren't going to get into dual wield two-hand swapping, Essence of Finality special attacks, or weaving in the Eldritch Crossbow special attack, as that will be saved for a later video that is more tuned to an advanced DPS rotation. This video is about the basics. Abilities in RuneScape fall into three separate categories: basics, thresholds, and ultimates. Basic abilities give the player 8% more adrenaline and does not have any adrenaline requirements to activate. Threshold abilities cost 15% adrenaline to use and requires you to have 50% adrenaline before activating. Ultimate abilities cost 100% adrenaline to use and requires you to also have 100% adrenaline before activating. Ultimate abilities are almost never worth it unless they are a damage boosting ultimate. Otherwise, they just take too much adrenaline for one hit. Thresholds will be a majority of your DPS, while basics are all about getting adrenaline up while still dealing moderate damage. Because these abilities fall into three distinct categories, we can determine which one is the best to use from that category based on the damage output of that ability. With that in mind, let's start with the basics. There are a total of 19 different basics or combos to look at. Some are duplicates because they deal different damage under different scenarios, but there are 19. I'm going to start by eliminating some that are too complicated and or too niche for this video. Freedom offhand auto, two-hand auto requires dual wield two-hand swapping, so we're not ready for that yet. And fragmentation shot lunging is an extremely niche switch that has little application in any PVM scenario. I'm also eliminating the defensive plus two-hand auto as it requires you to wait an extra tick to activate your next ability, and it has little impact on your DPS. And finally, I'm going to combine Mutated Dazing Shot and Dazing Shot together for simplicity's sake. Mutated Dazing Shot does deal more damage, but as they are right beside each other, it makes no impact on how the rotations play out for basics. This leaves us with 15 items in our list. To give an explanation of what the things in brackets mean, Chroming is an invention perk that gives you an extra hit with Ricochet per rank, so Chroming 4 will give you 4 extra hits. This adds a ton of damage if you have greater Ricochet. Walked means that the target move from where you hit it with the ability. This causes them to take 2 times damage with Fragmentation Shot. Flanking is another invention perk that increases the damage of your stunning abilities, assuming you are hitting them from behind, i.e. flanking them. Fragmentation Shot and Corruption Blast do not benefit from damage boosts like Prayer, so while the average ability damage is higher than Needle Strike and Dazing Shot when not walked, the bonuses make Needle Strike and Dazing Shot better and deal more damage on average. One final caveat with this list is that you don't want to use any of the bleed abilities that are highlighted red when in a group encounter. These abilities get overridden by other people, so if both you and someone else in your team uses Fragmentation Shot, then your Fragmentation Shot goes away for theirs, or their Fragmentation Shot can go away for yours. A common strategy with small group bosses like Duo Raksha is that one person will use Fragmentation Shot in the rotation while the other uses Corruption Shot. So that way you get the damage from the good bleed abilities, but you don't need to worry about overwriting each other. The simplest way to build a rotation is to go from top of the list and just activate the abilities you can while they are off cooldown. This is not the ideal way, but it's the simplest. We're going to be going from 0 to 100% adrenaline. For me, this is 12 basics because I have the Fury of the Small Relic on, but for you, it might be 13, or it might be as low as 10 if you get some impatient procs. Our target here cannot be flanked, it cannot be walked, so we have our ability prioritization as shown on the left, getting rid of the extraneous ones. Going down the list, we go Greater Ricochet, Snipe, Corruption Shot, Dazing Shot, Fragmentation Shot, Tuska's Wrath. At this point, Greater Ricochet is back off cooldown, so we use it again, then Snipe, but Corruption Shot isn't back up yet, so we have to go all the way down to Dazing Shot before we jump back up for Corruption Shot, and then all the way down to Binding Shot before finishing off with a Dazing Shot. In total, we picked up 1756% average ability damage. At first glance, this is not ideal. We use two really low damaging basics in Tuska's Wrath and Biding Shot, despite prioritizing the most damaging basic that is off cooldown. This presents a balancing act between high damaging abilities and low cooldown abilities. And it points to one, or I guess two if we're talking about dual wield as well, and that is Dazing Shot and Needle Strike. They both have a 5.4 second ability cooldown, which is equal to 3 global cooldowns, meaning every third ability can be Needle Strike or Dazing Shot. Your goal when building a ranged rotation is to never do an ability that is lower than Needle Strike or Dazing Shot, and it can be accomplished by making every third ability either Dazing Shot or Needle Strike. So let's do the same process again, going from top to bottom, but instead of always taking our best ability, we're going to use Dazing Shot on every third ability. Now this time we go Dazing Shot, Greater Ricochet, into Snipe, into Dazing Shot, into Corruption Shot, into Fragmentation Shot, back into a Dazing Shot as we're back at our 3, then to Greater Ricochet, then to Snipe, then to Dazing Shot, down to Tuska's Wrath, and then Tight Bindings. So we ran into the same issues here, where even when prioritizing Dazing Shot did not get the cooldowns to line up right, and we ended up with less overall damage at 1650%. So to fix that, we need to do a little more changes with the cooldowns, as we still aren't prioritizing the big cooldown abilities first. Corruption Shot and Fragmentation Shot both have a 15-second cooldown, but we put them right beside each other. If instead we move one of the 15-second abilities to the first set of 3 abilities, we can end up getting the Corruption Shot back off cooldown before we have to go use Tight Bindings. And here it'll play out with Dazing Shot, Greater Ricochet, Corruption Shot, Dazing Shot, Snipe, Fragmentation Shot. So after the first 6 abilities, we've done the exact same abilities, we've just done them in a slightly different order. And this means that Corruption Shot is closer to getting back on cooldown. So then we can go Dazing Shot, Greater Ricochet, Tuska's Wrath, as we need to do that because we don't have Snipe here because we delayed our first Snipe. And now we go Dazing Shot, Snipe, Corruption Shot. And we didn't have to end up using that Tight Bindings. That one simple change, moving Corruption to the first set of 3, meant that Corruption Shot was back off cooldown by the time we were originally going to need to use Tight Bindings, meaning that it could be used twice in this 12 ability rotation, and our total average damage ended up with 1790%, which was higher than our first one. While this was a really good exercise, this example doesn't have much practical use, as there is almost no PVM scenario where you're going to use 12 basics in a row, but it's a good exercise to help you understand exactly how to prioritize your abilities and how damage and cooldowns work in conjunction with each other. A good exercise for getting a better intuitive understanding of basic abilities and which ones you should and shouldn't use is give yourself a random amount of basics, say between 5 and 10, and try to optimize the order they should go in to maximize damage. And by the time you've done that, you'll know what's going on. And if you do that 3 or 4 times, then you can figure out the general pattern of abilities and you get a much more natural feel. So it can become second nature to you, and when you're focusing on boss mechanics, you can still do your regular DPS rotation. Thresholds are the next type of ability we're going to look at, and there are 13 on our list to start with, which sounds like a lot, but Salt the Wound makes up 4 of them. As with the basic abilities, we can eliminate the following for not being within the scope of the video, just too complicated for what I'm trying to get across. Shadow Tendrils plus 2-hand auto, SGB special attack, and Dark Bow Essence of Finality. This reduces our count down to 10 different thresholds. To explain Salt the Wound, the amount of damage it does is based on the number of puncture stacks that are on the target. Each use of Greater Dazing Shot adds a puncture stack. If the target goes 10 seconds without being hit by Greater Dazing Shot or Salt the Wound, then it loses all stacks and it goes back to 0. At 10 stacks, it's a very powerful ability, and with 6 to 9 stacks, it's a very high priority threshold. Most of the time, you aren't going to see use out of Salt the Wound in solo PVM, you just won't get your stacks up high enough or quick enough. But for group PVM, especially large group bosses like Beastmaster or Yakamaru, you're going to see it at 7, 8, 9, 10 stacks quite regularly, and you want to make sure you use the Salt the Wound ability there if you have it unlocked. This leaves us with 10 items on our priority list, and thresholds all pretty much have a long cooldown. Salt the Wound and Tight Bindings are the quickest at 15 seconds, Snapshot and Rapid Fire have a cooldown of 20 seconds, Bombardment has a cooldown of 30 seconds, and Shadow Tendrils has the longest at 45 seconds. So there's less of a worry when dealing with cooldowns, but they can still come into play a little bit. Generally with these, you want to start with the top when you have excess adrenaline to use and then make your way down the list as needed. A good rule of thumb is that Bombardment should be the worst threshold you use, and when you do use it, it's going to be pretty rare. Now that we have thresholds and basics covered, let's put it all together in a Death Swiftness rotation. This is where you're going to do the majority of your damage, and a proper rotation here can massively increase your DPS. Death Swiftness is an ability that gives you 50% more damage for 30 seconds. It's an ultimate ability, meaning it requires 100% adrenaline to use. Additionally, we are going to do this with the basis that you use the Planted Feet perk to extend the duration of your Death Swiftness to 37 seconds. Using a Ring of Vigor gives 10% adrenaline after using Death Swiftness, and drinking an adrenaline potion gets you up to 35 as a starting point that we're going to use. One more point, bleed abilities do not benefit from the 50% damage increase, so that changes our ability prioritization for basics, which is on the left. It's under the same constraints of no flanking and being unable to walk as we had with our basic rotation earlier. I've also put the threshold ability prioritizations on the right, so we have both going at the same time and can reference both of them. There's an ideal Death Swiftness rotation, and I could just give you the ability to use, but that wouldn't teach you anything, and once you get into a situation where you can't use those abilities in that order, you're going to end up not knowing what to do. But if you do want that perfect rotation, you can go read the spreadsheet on the PVME Discord, which is linked in the description. The general strategy I implement is similar to the basic rotation. I work on a 3 abilities cycle where ability 1 is Dazing Shot, ability 2 is your best basic damage in prioritization, and ability 3 is your best threshold in the prioritization order. This way your first 2 abilities give you 16% adrenaline, and your third ability takes away 15% adrenaline, leaving you basically net neutral on adrenaline. And by swapping between basics and threshold, you will always have a good ability to use at the same time. Shadow Tendrils has a very long cooldown of 45 seconds, so you're only going to get 1 use out of it per Death Swiftness, so you can wait till you've used your other shorter cooldown thresholds to use it. For example, you want to make sure you use Snapshot and Rapid Fire before Tendrils, so that way you can get 2 Snapshots and 2 Rapid Fires in your Death Swiftness. Let's see how this plays out. As per the rotation, we start with Dazing Shot, and then we go into Greater Ricochet, as that's the best basic ability we have available, and then Snapshot as is the best threshold available. Then we repeat Dazing Shot, and Snipe is now our best basic, so we go ahead and use that. Now, while Tendrils is the best threshold we have available, we want to use Rapid Fire to start the cooldown of Rapid Fire so we can get a second Rapid Fire as our Death Swiftness ends. Then we go back to Dazing Shot, and now Greater Ricochet is back off cooldown, so we use it again, and we're ready to use our Tendrils for our very big hit. Then we go Dazing Shot into Snipe again, and Snapshot is off cooldown, so we get our second Snapshot of our Death Swiftness, and then we repeat again, doing Dazing Shot, Greater Ricochet, and then Rapid Fire. After these 5 rotations, you'll be left with a couple seconds on your Death Swiftness where you can throw in another basic or 2 before it ends. This is a very static rotation, but once you get farther into PVM and get things like the Impatient perk, which gives you a chance to get 3% more adrenaline per basic, and the Fury of the Small Relic, which gives you 1% more adrenaline from basics, you can cut away from this simple 3 ability cycle and do more thresholds in comparison with basics. It's always a balancing act between damage and adrenaline. One change when it comes to dual wield, you want to make sure that Needle Strike is the second ability, so that way you go basic Needle Strike threshold, because Needle Strike gives you a 7% damage boost as we discussed earlier, so you want that damage boost to be applying to your threshold abilities, so you always want to Needle Strike before threshold. Starting example would go Greco Needle Strike. Snapshot would be a great way to start off a Death Swiftness rotation for dual wield range. Before we end the video, I want to talk about Criminal Bolts, as they are very important to range's strength in the meta at the moment. Criminal Bolts are a special type of tier 99 bolt that are also gem tipped, which means they have a special ability associated with them. There are 3 worthwhile Criminal Bolts. Ruby Criminal Bolts have a 5% chance to activate, and when they do, they replace what your hit would have been with a new one. The damage of the new hit is based off the percentage of the HP that the monster has left. Generally, it's advisable to use them until the target is at half HP, and then at that point you're going to start doing less damage rather than more damage with them. They also have a shared cooldown per target, so if 2 people are using Ruby Bacriminal Bolts on the same target, you will get less personal activations. Onyx Bacriminal Bolts have a 10% chance to activate, and when they do, they increase damage on that hit by 25%. They also heal you for 25% of the original damage, so the same extra damage is what you heal. These bolts are great for sustaining healing in places where you need a little bit extra. Next solos or tanking group bosses like AOD or Solak are great use of them. I personally love using Onyx bolts while tanking Solak with ranged. Hydrix Bacriminal Bolts are the most powerful but also the most expensive. They have a 10% chance to activate, and when they do, they give you 10% adrenaline immediately, and you gain 1% extra adrenaline on basics for the next 15 seconds. This can be used with Death Swiftness to put out more thresholds and get away from the Dazing Shot basic threshold combination we learned earlier for something a little more powerful. Or you can bring in some special attacks that we ignored, like the Dark Bow Essence of Finality or Saren Godbow special attack. But with that out of the way, that's all I wanted to cover on this introductory ranged DPS video. I hope you enjoyed the video and learned something from it. RS3 PVM has a pretty tough learning curve, but once you get in the door, it's pretty easy to slowly increase your DPS and slowly increase your ability, and one day you might be the next Evo Lucario. Take care, and I'll catch you in the next one.